passionate about business and about maybe starting your business, or maybe you've already started your business and you want to um, change entity styles or entity types from an LLC to a corporation, or from a sole proprietorship to an LLC. There are many different types. But first, my name is Anwar. I am a business law attorney. I work primarily out of Oakland, but I am in San Francisco as well. Uh, I have worked with LCCRSF for some time now, providing these workshops for entrepreneurs who want to grow their business or want to hone in on better practices within their business. LCCRSF, as you guys know, is an organization that is uh, deeply embedded in the community. It was founded, I believe, in 1968, and it works to advance and protect and promote civil rights, and also I think from there this sort of business element also branched out from there. So I'm happy to be working with them. Also, I want to note that this presentation um, does not mean that I am your attorney. Does not. Please don't interpret this as a legal advice. Every single person and every business idea requires individualized business attention or legal attention for that business. So it would be it would behoove you. It would be best if you have an idea to consult an attorney or an organization like LCCRSF, and they can get you in touch with an attorney who can then help you. But this is just going to be a broad survey of the difference between a sole proprietorship, which is one type of entity, and an LLC, which is a different type of entity. So let's start off with a sole proprietorship. A sole proprietorship is it's as soon as you start your business, or as soon as you start providing services in exchange for money, or selling a product in exchange for money or some other kind of benefit, you have effectively started a business. And that's actually the legal definition of a business, is providing a business, a service or a product in exchange for something else. But now this is the transaction of business, right? And so by doing so, even though you have not formally registered anywhere, you have started a sole proprietorship, meaning that it's automatic as soon as you start transactioning business. Whereas an LLC is a more formal procedure. An LLC is something that requires you to take further action, to take steps to going to the Secretary of State website and registering an LLC with an LLC name, excuse me, and paying a fee. And you're probably wondering, why would I want to do that? If a sole proprietorship is free to form and I don't have to take any formal steps to form, why would I want to pay $800 a year to the Secretary of State to form an LLC? And that's what this chat is about here. Okay, this is what this workshop is about. So, a sole proprietorship is the simplest form of business. I've already mentioned that. And we're going to be talking about sole proprietorships and LLCs in the context of three factors. One, it's going to be management. What does it mean for you to manage a business if you're a sole proprietorship or an LLC? Two, it's going to be liability protection. What does it mean for you if you're a sole proprietor to protect yourself, your personal assets from any kind of liability? And three, we're going to talk about things in terms of taxes. And how is it that one can save money by registering as an LLC, perhaps, or maybe it's not worth it, depending on your circumstances, to register as an LLC because it's just going to be more trouble, more paperwork, and more money at the end of the year. So that's what this is about. So first, um, you've probably heard, um, it probably makes one think that your business is more official by forming some kind of entity, either a corporation or an LLC. So I do want to say this. It's important to realize that it doesn't mean you're going to be more successful by being an LLC or more legitimate by being an LLC. I know people who have been in business for 40 years as a sole proprietorship, and they've never been sued and they've never experienced any issues. But that's not the case for everybody. So, in terms of management, if you're a sole proprietor, that means you are the boss. You're the only boss. You're the one. You're like a one-person show, and you're making all the decisions for your business. Um, you have full control. It's very simple. You fire people, you hire people, you make name changes if you want. No one can tell you what to do. Okay, that's in terms of management. That can be a very powerful thing. And people who want to have full control sometimes they don't want to um, transfer the type of entity they have as a sole proprietor to an LLC or anything else for that matter. Now, it's important to mention it's impossible to talk about a sole proprietorship without talking about something called a general partnership. If you bring someone else on to work with you as your business partner, you just you just formed a general partnership with that person. And now you split everything 50-50. Profits and also liabilities 50-50 by law, unless you have a partnership agreement that says otherwise. But we can talk about that later. But we're just talking, if you're a one person business and you're not partnered with anyone else, you're a sole proprietorship. If you're partnered with someone else, it's a general partnership. Or with 3 people or 4 people or 10 people, it's a general partnership. And you all split everything equally in accordance with the law, which is depending on the number of members or the number of partners, that's what you're going to share in terms of profits and also liabilities. Okay. So what does liability mean? Liability in the simplest form, it means your exposure to your personal exposure to debts and lawsuits effectively. So uh, the less, if you're a sole proprietor and you borrow money for your business and your business goes under or your business goes bankrupt, you are still personally liable for that debt and any other obligations. If you have a contract with your business with a vendor, for example, let's say you have a bakery and you contract with someone to deliver flour for the next 3 years, and you have a contract worth $20,000 and you default, you're still personally liable for that contract. If you have a brick and mortar building, a physical building, and you serve customers, and someone comes in and they trip over a cable and they fall, and so and you knew that that cable was there and other people had complained to you about that before, now you are, and they sue you and they sue the business for everything it has, but it's not enough to cover the costs, the damages to that person, you are personally liable. Okay, that's what liability means. Meaning, if your business assets, including money and machinery and everything else, is not enough to cover your liabilities, then you are personally liable. Your house is personally liable. Your personal bank accounts, your Ferrari, sitting in the driveway or whatever, right? You're personally liable. Now, an LLC, on the other hand, is a separate entity. An LLC is something that you register and you say, this LLC is its own person per se, right? Um, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But let me finish with taxes first, and then I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison.
And now
Yeah.
we have a question in the Q&A. Do you
Okay.
want to do that now, or you want to go ahead and continue?
Sure. Let's see here.
Yeah, it just says, do you have to have an LLC for a general partnership?
Okay, good. We're going to talk about a general partnership. So who asked that? Just out of curiosity, someone?
This was Kendi Amaya Morfin.
Okay. I'm not seeing the question. It's funny. Kendi. Maybe they just asked you. Okay. Oh, maybe it's in the questions and answers. Do you have to have an LLC? There it is, Kendi. Kendi, I imagine, based on your question, Kendi, right? Fighter jet flying over the city. It's very loud. So, let's see. Kendi, I imagine that you're probably thinking you're probably a partner with someone else to register as an LLC. And we're going to talk about that, I promise. So thank you for bringing that up. Okay, not able to.
I'm not sorry. I think maybe your audio got cut off a little bit.
Did you can you hear me now? Is that okay?
It's pretty muted still.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this better?
No, I think it maybe turned off.
Um, let's see here. Is this better? No. Better.
Yes, that's better. Way better.
Okay. That's very strange. So a fighter jet flew over my office because it's Fleet Week. I don't know if you can hear that, but yeah, it was extremely loud.
No worries. Thanks, Sanwa.
Yeah, so I imagine that's probably what happened with my microphone. I don't know, but they're flying over and it's just very loud. Anyhow, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Kendi. That's a good question, and I want to address that question. But first, I want to describe what a sole proprietor is in terms of those three factors. Then an LLC, and then I'm going to do a side by side comparison so you can see. So in terms of liability, I talked about a sole proprietor. You're fully liable for anything that your business cannot cover. Now, what can you get insurance? Of course, you can get insurance. And I recommend that everyone who has a sole proprietorship to have enough insurance to cover your potential liability. What does this mean? That means that depending on the type of business that you have, you're going to gauge how much insurance you need. If you are a high risk business, for example, if you are producing, maybe you're manufacturing bicycles, there's a lot of moving parts. Wheels could come off, seats could come off, something could happen, and you could be liable for that. So you need enough insurance to cover any potential issues. On the other hand, if you have a stationary business where you're just making cards or working with paper, it's probably a low liability business and you don't need that much. So even though you're personally exposed in a sole proprietorship, you could have enough insurance to cover your liability. And this is really important. If you're going to have insurance, make sure that you review your insurance policy to ensure that it covers the type of work that you're doing. Because I've seen it too many times where people buy insurance and it doesn't cover what it is that happens in their work because they don't update what it is, they haven't reflected accurately what they do for work to what their insurance covers. So it needs to meet
those categories. It needs to align in those points. Now, taxes. Um, as a sole proprietorship, your business and you are subject to something called pass-through taxation, meaning when you file taxes, you're going to file taxes on your personal income tax return. If my business makes $100,000 in 2024, I am personally liable for those taxes. In other words, I will be paying $100,000 on my personal tax bracket as if I were filing as a person. Now, I also have deductions I can make. Obviously, anything related to my business, I can deduct. There's no separate business taxes. And I'm also responsible. This is really important because I'm going to compare this to the LLC. You're responsible for paying self-employment taxes, also known as the FICA taxes. In other words, like Medicare, Social Security. There goes the Jets again. Sorry. You guys can't hear it, but if any of you are in San Francisco, these things are like, yeah, anyhow. Okay. I see another question here by Luisa, and I'm going to get to that. Now, the LLC, on the other hand, the LLC is a separate legal entity, and it gets its own social security number. So if I have a sole proprietorship, I'm filing taxes under my own social security number and also an EIN, which is what I can have an EIN or I can file under my own social. It doesn't really matter in terms of taxes. But if you have an LLC, you register the LLC and you also get an EIN number with the IRS. And that LLC files its taxes separately from you, from your personal income. Okay. And in terms of management, the LLC, they're not called business partners, or it's not a sole proprietorship. They're called members. The owners of an LLC are called members. And in terms of managing an LLC, you could also allow yourself to manage the LLC without any inhibitions, without any limitations. But if you have other people who you want to partner with, like the question earlier, it was, let's see here, from Kendi. The question from Kendi was, should I start an LLC if I have a business partner? And the answer to that question is maybe, depending on the type of business and depending on your personal circumstances. But at the very least, Kendi, you should have a partnership agreement. Everyone who has a business partner should have a partnership agreement. In the LLC, it's called an operating agreement. So sole proprietorship, 2 people, general partnership, partnership agreement. LLC, 2 members or more, operating agreement. And those documents are really important because they're going to define what happens, what are the roles of each person, what are you responsible for, and what am I responsible for? Who gets paid what? What if I come into the business with $300,000 to invest and you come in with no money, but you know how to run the business? So how are we going to figure this out, right? Who's going to manage the business? The person who knows how to manage the business. And who's going to be a passive investor? The guy who just comes in with the money. And so in an LLC, it's very clear, it's very clearly defined. And in a general partnership, it's less clearly defined, but you have to define it in a general partnership agreement. And that's very important. So, Candy, to your question, if you have a general partnership, you don't need to form an LLC, but you should at least have a partnership agreement to define the roles, who gets paid when, what happens if the business falls apart, who buys who out, who has a right to a buyout, who doesn't, how are you going to value the business? It doesn't matter if you're best friends right now or if you're husband and wife, or if you're mother and daughter, you need a partnership agreement. Period. End of story. Okay. Here's a question, another question from Luisa. It says, I am an artisan. I don't have any formal legal entity. Where should I start the process to register for an LLC? Is it worth it? Because I don't really make that much money. So that, and this is a really important question, and this is why the most important question is, and this is something I mentioned earlier. Everybody wants to have a corporation or an LLC because they think it's the right thing to do. It's not necessarily the right thing to do, depending on your circumstances. For someone like Luisa, she says she's an artisan, but I don't know what kind of artisan she is. Is she making pottery? And if she's only making $10,000 a year from pottery, is it worth it? I would say it's not. I would say, but if you're an artisan and you're making something else that's very complicated, like big, I don't know, maybe you're making sculptures that are really large and they could potentially break or fall on someone. I have no idea. Or maybe they install them and they break and they really hurt, then perhaps it's worth having enough insurance. And on top of that, also having an LLC. Or maybe you work with someone else and you're expecting to grow exponentially in the next year or 2 years, then it may be worth having an LLC. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Because when you have an LLC, you could also issue shares. Shares are like pieces of the company. If I organize an LLC, this is another important element of managing an LLC, is that if I form an LLC and I issue 10,000 shares, I basically just divided the company into 10,000 little pieces and I issue these shares to other people. And if I am the founder, I'm going to probably issue myself at least 51% of those shares because I want to have control over the company. Because presumably, I know I have the idea in my head and I can run this company better than anyone else. So I want to have more control. Presumably, that's not always the case. Maybe someone else knows how to run it better, right? And you have to have the humility to pass it on. But that's a chat for another time. So if you register an LLC and you issue shares and you want to bring someone on to the company, but you don't have how to pay them, you don't have the money to pay them because maybe you're a startup. Instead of paying them with money, perhaps you can issue them shares and bring them on as a partner and say, hey, look, we don't have money to pay you. I'm going to issue you 10,000 shares. Let's grow this company together. You will own, sorry, not 10,000. I'm going to issue you 1,000 shares. So 1,000 shares of 10,000 shares is 10% of the company. You just gave away 10% of the company to someone and you issue them a certificate of like a share certificate that you issue them, basically an ownership certificate that they own 10%, and then you file that with your company papers. And now they own 10%. And maybe you want to bring someone else on and you want to issue them shares, So this is why it's a very sort of flexible way to manage an LLC. In a sole proprietorship, full control. In an LLC, depending on how much control you want to give. There's also two types of LLCs in terms of management. One is called a manager-managed LLC, meaning that you have a central management group, or one person generally, that manages the entire LLC. And then everyone else is sort of just either an employee or they're doing something else, but they don't manage and they cannot manage. As soon as they manage, it destroys the structure internally, and then the managers can generally be sued because they're the ones who are handling all of the all of the managerial roles. So for example, and this is a very common scenario is you have a chef who's very good or she's very good at cooking a particular style of food. Maybe, I don't know, let's just say French food. And she's great and she's known all over the world. And somebody wants to start a restaurant here in Oakland and they want to have her as the head chef. And this chef has been doing this for a while and she knows how to run a restaurant. She knows how to manage a restaurant. And I have full faith in her. And I know that she can run a successful restaurant and we can make a lot of money together. But I don't know how to run a restaurant. But you know what I do have? I have a lot of money and I want to invest in her and I want to invest in this restaurant. So what I'm going to be is I'm going to be a passive investor and I'm going to start an LLC called a manager managed LLC where I don't do any managing. She does all the managing and I'm just a passive investor. And that's going to be in your operating agreement. That's going to be clearly stated that this guy is not going to be managing. He's not going to interfere with the management. And all I'm going to do is invest. Now, you can imagine sometimes the investors come in to a restaurant and maybe they see something that they want to change and they start managing. They start interfering with the chef's managerial roles. That's a faux pas. You don't do that because then the chef says, "Hey, what's the problem? I'm a manager in this LLC, and you're just a passive investor." And they just manage. The business goes under because the guys who don't know what they're doing are now managing, and they interfere. And now the chef can sue that passive investor and say, "You breached the operating agreement. We had a contract that you would not manage. I would manage. You would be the investor. You breached that operating agreement and you caused the business to go under." That's a scenario that happens and that could happen. So in terms of management with the LLC, you can make it whatever you want to make it. There's a lot of flexibility. Now, let's talk about taxes. This goes to Luisa's question. Is it worth starting an LLC? There's extra paperwork. I got to pay $800 a year to the franchise tax board minimum. But if I make more than $250,000 a year, I have to pay another additional, and then more than, I think it's 400. It's an additional. I forget what the tiers are. But depending on the amount of money you make, you pay more to the franchise tax of California, franchise tax board. But sometimes it's worth it. And I'm going to explain to you why. So there is something called pass-through taxation in the LLC, where basically you pay it under your own personal tax returns. I can have an LLC and I can be taxed on my own personal tax returns. But you could also select to be taxed as a S Corp or a C Corp for taxes. Now, the most popular form of tax election to date, and it has been for the last 5 years, is something called S corporation tax election. If I start a corporation or an LLC, and by the way, LLCs and corporations can both elect to be taxed as an S corp. Traditionally, we have something called a C corp. The C corporation is it's the oldest model for this sort of a separate entity from the person. And then in the 1970s, somebody came up with the LLC. Well, in California, if you want to be taxed as an S corp, that's not a different type of entity. That's just a tax election. So we have LLCs and we have C corps. And then for tax purposes, you can be taxed pass through taxation. You can be taxed as a corporation, which is like double taxation, or you can be taxed as an S corp. Again, that's not a separate legal entity. It's just a tax election. So what does S corp mean? It's kind of a sexy term. It's being thrown around. I'm sure you've probably already heard of it. It's a clever way to save taxes, um, to save on paying Uncle Sam. And the way that it works is this. And this only works. This goes to Luisa's question. It only really works if you're making a certain amount of money above your reasonable salary. So the way that it works is, let's say I'm a software engineer, and I go off on my own, and I start my own software engineer business, and I'm designing and I'm creating products, and I charge a certain amount of money. And the first year, as an LLC, I make $200,000. And I'm being taxed on a pass-through basis, meaning I'm paying on my own personal tax, my own personal income tax. I just basically paid $200,000 on a personal income tax bracket. But next year, I talked to my accountant, and she says, why don't you elect to be taxed as an S corp instead as a LLC pass through? And I say, what is that? Well, what you do is you take all the money that the S corp makes and you pay yourself a reasonable salary from that money. A reasonable salary is defined as what a person in your position would be paid doing that type of work in that geographic area. This is generally what it is. So in San Francisco, a software engineer, what's a reasonable salary for a software engineer in San Francisco versus a reasonable salary for a software engineer in Watsonville or in Visalia, California, or in, I don't know, somewhere up north, right? It's going to be a big difference probably. But let's just say reasonable, I would say somewhere between maybe $75,000 a year to about, depending on, $220,000 a year, maybe. That's a reasonable salary. And you're going to pay yourself probably on the lower end. Now, if you made $200,000 a year next year, you pay yourself a reasonable salary, maybe let's say $90,000. You pay $90,000 as a W-2 employee on your personal income tax. The $110,000 that's left over, you pay on a different tax bracket, on a lower tax bracket, especially because you're not paying self-employment taxes anymore. So to Luisa's point, it's only really worth it if you're making approximately, this is ballpark, about $30,000 more than what you're paying yourself as a reasonable salary, as the reasonable salary that you're paying yourself. If you want, I can give you a separate example. Now, I forgot to mention liability here, but because an LLC is a separate entity with a separate social security number, again called an EIN number, right? You have to keep everything separate. But that LLC, if that LLC gets sued by creditors or by that person who tripped on that cable and fell, they're going to sue the LLC. And if the LLC doesn't have enough assets, then that's it. That's where it ends. They can't come after you personally because the LLC is a separate entity. and you are a separate entity. And whatever the LLC does, they're responsible for, but you are not. That doesn't mean that you don't get insurance for the LLC. The best way to do things is if you're going to register an LLC and you work in a relative high risk area, then you want to have enough insurance with the LLC and you want to keep everything separate. Why? Because if the LLC gets sued, you still want to continue to do business with the LLC. You don't want the business to go under. So you have enough insurance and you want to make sure that policy covers what you're doing, right? It aligns. If the LLC gets sued by someone, the insurance company should cover that lawsuit, protecting the LLC. If the insurance is not enough, they can go after the LLC. And if it's still not enough, they can't go after you because there's something called a corporate veil, and the corporate veil protects you. And you're on this side, right? So they can't come after you unless you're not keeping everything separate. And this is kind of important, and I don't want to dive into this, but if you're going to have a corporation or an LLC or any kind of separate entity, even a nonprofit, you want to make sure that everything stays separate. If you have a credit card, make sure you have a business credit card. Make sure you have a separate bank account. Make sure that you have, if you're going to be using email, don't use your personal email for business matters. Use a separate email for business, personal email for personal matters. By keeping everything separate, you are communicating to the world that it's true that this LLC is separate and from you. But if you're using personal bank accounts to pay for LLC debts and LLC bank accounts to pay for personal debts, and you're using personal emails, and maybe you're using the company car to take, your kids on family trips, or you're using your personal car for LLC, then you're communicating to the world that this LLC is not really a separate entity from you. That in fact, it's something called by the courts a alter ego of you. All it is it's you, and this is really just an alter ego, and you're really just kind of the same person. And in that case, if someone can prove that you're commingling, that's what it's called, commingling funds or resources, then they can come after your personal assets. So it's not foolproof. It's still very hard to prove. But if you just keep the basics, you away from the LLC, the basics, emails, credit cards, bank accounts, separate. Generally speaking, the courts like to respect that boundary between the two separate, between you and the LLC. So to recap, sole proprietor, you're doing business for yourself. You're the boss. You have all the management power and everything. If you partner up with someone, you're called general partners. And then both of you have to figure out how you're going to share management and also income and liabilities. As an LLC, you can define how it is you want to manage. It can be member managed. All the members manage it, like a general partnership, or it could be manager managed. And you can really define it in any way that you want to define it. And there's a lot of different options that you can do this. In terms of liability, you should always have enough insurance, whether you're a sole proprietorship or whether you're an LLC. You should always have enough insurance to cover your possible liability, and make sure, again, that policy covers what you're actually doing. You're not going to get, liability insurance to cover, I don't know, maybe food poisoning when you're when you're running an auto shop or something. That's a silly example, but you get the picture. They have to be somewhat aligned. Also, make sure you have enough insurance. And remember, if you don't have insurance, you're also sole proprietor, you are fully exposed. If you don't have insurance as an LLC, the LLC's fully exposed, but not you. And if you're commingling funds, the LLC and you may be fully exposed. Okay. And in terms of taxes, as a sole proprietor, you will be taxed on your personal income taxes for any money you earn. And as an LLC, you can select whether you're taxed personally or you're taxed as what's called an S Corp. And that's, you have to make a certain amount of money. First, you have to define what someone in your position will be making and what a reasonable salary is. A reasonable salary is actually defined by the IRS generally, but they cannot tell you what everyone is making all over the US. You have to decide what's a reasonable salary. Can I rationalize what I'm paying myself? Is that too low? You don't want it to be too low. And you also don't want it to be too high. If it's too low, you're cheating the government. If it's too high, you're cheating yourself. So you have to pay somewhat on the lower end, but not too low. You pay yourself, and then anything extra that you make that year, you pay on a very different bracket, and you pay much lower taxes. And it really only makes sense if you're making about $30,000 more than what you would pay yourself as a reasonable salary, because then it kind of makes sense for tax purposes, because then you can save thousands of dollars a year. Maybe, here's another question. I'm a sole proprietor with an EIN number. Now, if I, with my son, operate an LLC, can I use the same EIN number? Or, open an LLC. Got it. Okay. Or do I need to apply for a new EIN number? That's a good, what I would do is, there's something called a conversion. You can convert one entity type to another. And you could use the same EIN number, but I recommend, sometimes that's too complicated. And what people just do is they just open up a new EIN number with a new name, because you have to remember, you have to change everything. You have to change the name. You have to change the name on the bank account. The bank account is going to ask for what so it depends on how easy it is for you. But for instance, if I own a company called Acme as a sole proprietor, and I want to convert to an LLC, the business name has to have LLC in it, or limited liability company. I can't just call myself Acme as an LLC. I have to communicate to the world that I'm a limited liability company. And every time I sign a document, I'm signing as Acme LLC by Anwar, not me as an individual. So, and you also have to change the name with the IRS. And so if you get the IRS, if you change the name with the IRS with the same EIN number, then you can change everything else. Or you can just ask for a new LLC name with a new EIN number, and it's probably a lot easier sometimes. But can you do it? Sure, but it's gonna be some work. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Okay. I see a question here from Claudia. I'm starting an online anger management business. Later, I would like to expand to domestic violence. I will be offering Zoom classes to the court mandated clients. I registered my business as an LLC. Should I have gone with a sole proprietor? If so, how can I change from an LLC to a sole proprietor? Yes. So this is kind of the same question, but the other way around, right? You're converting from an LLC to a sole proprietor. Is it possible? Yes, it is. It's possible. You can do it. Now, this is actually this is a good question, Claudia, because one thing that I've seen lately, it's a popular trend, and I wonder if, Claudia, if you're registered as either as a marriage and family therapist, as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist, as a social worker, or there's a fifth category there, or as a life coach. Any of those. If you can provide me a no, none. Okay, so she says none. So So yeah, so you're basically one thing. I've seen people who are life coaches now. You can, instead of going to MFT school, instead of going to a regulated field that's regulated by a certain agency in California, such as I think it's the some kind of psychology board in California, you have to get licensed as a marriage and family therapist, social worker, psychotherapist, or one of those, right? And then they regulate the field, and it's a lot of work to go through all of those programs. But there's also people who don't want to go through that, and they just say, you know what, I just want to be a life coach. I want to be a life coach, and I want to motivate people to be better in their lives. And maybe you're a really good communicator, or maybe you're just you're really empathetic, but you don't want to do all the schooling. And I've had life coaches come to me and they get registered or certified as a life coach, and they say, can I just start a sole proprietor, an LLC or something? And I say, well, sometimes depending on the type of field that you're working in, they won't allow you to be an LLC, for example. And there's like a whole list of like businesses that won't allow you to be an LLC because they're saying we cannot um, waive the liability for the type of work that you're doing. You're doing really sensitive work, and we cannot have people just recklessly providing sort of like psychotherapy advice or something like that, right? And it's not to say that you're going to be reckless, but they're just, that's what they're thinking. They're thinking you need to be certified, you need to have a certain amount of insurance, malpractice insurance, and you can be a professional corporation maybe, but you cannot be an LLC. But life coaches can. A life coach is sort of this unregulated field where you can get certified in a few months, and it's kind of a, depending on who you are as a person, you know, you expose yourself to more or less liability. That said, I 100% recommend you have enough insurance to cover anything. I had a client who wanted to work with PTSD clients, PTSD clients from the military. And she's a chemist, and she wanted to serve and talk to people who had been in the military and suffered PTSD. And I said, we have to be very careful here because we're crossing the line into psychotherapy services. So something like this, similar to, anger management, it depends on what you're going to do. But I wrote an article on this, and you don't ever want to advertise yourself as providing any kind of medical care or psychotherapy care, or that you're promising to fix anyone's issues. All you're doing is you're a sort of, whatever you call yourself, you're guiding people in a positive direction by providing positive positive reinforcement. And I also recommend that you partner up with someone who is actually doing psychotherapy services, because the board of psychotherapy can cite people who are providing psychotherapy services when they're not licensed under the regulatory rubric. And social workers can do that, yes. And and so like, see, and there's all these other different sort of facilitators, like anger management and domestic violence facilitators, and they're doing amazing work. And whatever it is, whatever body of law is regulating your field, you just need to make sure that you stay in that lane. And that works for everybody. Anyone who is like doing carpentry work without a license, or even like, I mean, it's crazy what you need to get. You need to get like a license and a permit for everything now, but that's kind of where we are. And I also have people who are running workshops with universities, who are helping, they're helping the student body or the teacher body become more empathetic to the certain needs of certain students. And that's amazing work. But, it's my job as a lawyer to tell them, just make sure that you stay in your lane and you're good. Now, let's see here. There's also a question here from Daniel. What's the benefit of electing being taxed as an S corp for the LLC? Maybe you weren't here, Daniel, but I'll repeat it. If you're taxed as an S corp, you can elect to be taxed as an S corp. That is what you said. Yeah. So you have to be an LLC or a corporation to be taxed as an S corp. And if you get taxed as an S corp, you pay yourself a reasonable salary from all the money that you make. If you make $500,000 in 2024 as a warehouse manager, and you're just managing the warehouse and delivering, all this product that you're serving, you pay yourself the salary of a warehouse manager in the Bay Area, maybe in Hayward or something, I don't know, Oakland. And that's going to be somewhere around ballpark, I'm guessing $65,000 a year. So the other $435,000, you're not paying income taxes on that. You are paying income taxes, but you're not paying income taxes on the same bracket as you would on your personal income taxes. So you actually save like tons and tons of money in this scenario. But if you're making $65,000 a year and you pay yourself a reasonable salary of $65,000 a year, then there's no point. You're just losing money because you're paying the franchise tax, $800 a year, plus you have to do all this paperwork. It doesn't really make sense. Okay, let's see what else. So I'll give you guys a couple scenarios here. Sarah is a freelance graphic designer in California. She operates a sole proprietor. She handles everything herself. She finds clients, she manages finances, and she delivers the services herself. She drafts the contracts, sends them out to the client, they sign them, she charges them, it bills them, does everything herself. A client sues Sarah for breach of contract. A sole proprietor, Sarah's personal assets, her savings account, checking account, her home, they're all at risk if the business cannot cover the judgment. Taxes. Sarah reports her business income directly on her personal tax return and pays self-employment taxes. Does anyone know what self-employment taxes are? 13.4, I think. Yeah, ballpark, that's what it is. So as an LLC, you don't have to pay that, but we'll talk about that when we get to the LLC. In addition on her income taxes. So conclusion, Sarah enjoys the simplicity of her structure, but she assumes personal risk. She is also limited if she wants to bring in a partner or she wants to sell the business, and there is no separate legal entity. That's sort of true. You can also appraise a business or value a business. Right now, I am in the process of appraising a landscape business for someone who just called me earlier this week, actually last week, but and they want to sell it to someone, his business partner, because they're having a partnership dispute and they're walking away from the business. And one guy wants to be paid out. Well, what's the business worth? They decided what the business is worth, maybe, or do we get a professional appraiser to do it? How do we decide who gets what? They don't have a partnership agreement. They don't have anything to indicate anything. So that means we have to rely on something called RUPA, which is the Revised Uniform Partnership Act, which is embedded in law, which says equal partners, equal liabilities, equal distributions. There's also law that states how to dissolve a business. It's already written in law. You don't have to have one, but it's better to have a general partnership agreement. Luckily, in this case, they both bought the business 50-50. And so they both get 50-50, right? But if one of them had bought the business for more and less, and so it gets a little complicated. Scenario number 2. Carlos and Maria start a landscaping business in California, and they form an LLC to structure their ownership. They establish the business as member managed LLC. Remember, manager managed and member managed. Manager manages, there's one specific person that manages. Member manages, everybody shares on the management. Ownership. Carlos owns 60% and Maria owns 40%. Based on their initial investment as outlined in their operating agreement, one of them owns 60% of the business, obviously, and the other owns 40%. Now, one thing to consider here is voting rights are oftentimes tied into ownership. In a typical operating agreement, it's majority vote. If you own 60% of the LLC and your partner owns 40%, and it also says voting rights as majority, then you're going to have majority vote to make decisions on behalf of the LLC. Not all decisions, but most decisions. Liability. The LLC is sued after an employee is injured on the job. Since the business is an LLC, only the business assets are at risk. Carlos and Maria's personal assets are protected, especially since they have insurance for the LLC. Taxes. The LLC's income taxes are passed through to Carlos and Maria's personal tax returns. They opted to be taxed on an S corp to save on self-employment taxes, and they pay $800 annual a year to the franchise tax board in California. And there's specific forms that you file on your taxes for that, and just leave that to your accountant, but you could also file it yourself. Anyways, we'll talk about that. In terms of sole prop and the LLC, there's 1065 form, there's a K1 form, but we can get into the minutia of that if you guys want, but it's not necessary for now. Conclusion: Carlos and Maria enjoy the protection of the limited liability that the LLC offers, the flexibility of management, and a clear ownership structure, 60-40. They also benefit from tax options available to the LLC. So let's see here. Okay. But there's another question. Thank you so much for your answer. So you can use an old business name, but add the LLC to apply new EIN or switch EIN number. Yeah, it's not that easy. And let's talk about names, because as a sole proprietorship, you can basically select any name. And probably not many people are going to care. I mean, if I have a burger shop, am I going to call myself McDonald's? No, I'm not, because then McDonald's is going to come and, serve me with a cease and desist letter. But as an LLC, there's only certain names that you can select, and there's only availability for certain names. For instance, I bet you that, I don't know, something like Full Throttle Racing Parts is already taken, because it's probably a very common business name or something. Or Sweet Things as a cake shop or something, it's probably taken, right? So you have to go on the LLC, on the Secretary of State website, look in the name, type in the name, see if it's available or if it's not. So if you have a sole proprietorship, Jojo, and the business name is very common or something, and you go on the LLC website, you won't be able to use it. You're gonna have to change the name completely. But to answer your question, you can use an old business name, and yes, add the LLC if it's available, and then what I would do is I would just change the business name with the IRS and try to use the same EIN number. And then you're gonna have to go to your bank account, to your bank, and then change it there. And then your probably your fictitious business name with the city and change it there. And then with your insurance company and change it there, and your website and change it there. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So I always tell people, like, if you have a business name, make sure you love it. And because it's going to be with you, and to change it back, it's a pain in the butt. So okay, let's see. This is basically all I have for you guys. I would love for you guys to just ask me a question regarding your specific business, but if you don't have one, that's okay too. And feel free to pop on the camera too. I mean, And if there was something, Anna, I cannot hear you now.
Chat.
You might
Oh,
hear an echo, so I'll mute myself really quickly if you do.
Sí.
I'm not seeing any questions.
No estoy viendo ningún.
Let
I
me
do see
check in
one
the
from
room if there's
Daniel.
any questions.
I do see one from Daniel here. This is a great question, Daniel. Can I access LLC for personal use? So many people, and do not do this, but most people they just like withdraw money from the LLC for their own personal use, and you know, they never really have issues with it. But if you're going to give your personal money to the LLC, you have to treat it like a separate person. Now, the right way to do it is if you're going to give money to the LLC, it's a loan to the LLC. You're loaning money to your own company, and it has to be reflected somewhere. And if you're going to take money from the LLC, it either has to be categorized as a distribution or a loan to you that you have to pay back with interest to the LLC, to your own LLC. If there's something to learn here is the LLC should be considered a almost like a separate business. That's not even yours. I mean, would you walk into a random business and say, I want $10,000? No, but you can ask them for a loan. You can say, hey, I'm in need of 10,000 bucks. How about it? How about a loan? And then they might loan you with something with interest, right? So that's how you have to treat it. And if you want to succeed in business and you want to have a successful LLC and you never want to get yourself into hot water with, this sort of commingling issue, and you want to have everything separate, then, you should do things the right way from the beginning. It's not easy. I mean, especially if you're running your own business, it's not easy. No one said it was easy, but it does happen. I hope that answered your question, Daniel. And here's the other thing: if you do take a distribution from the LLC, then that is taxed in certain ways, and you have to look at the operating agreement, right? Does the operating agreement allow you or your other members, your business partners, to take distributions? And if so, who gets the distribution first? Maybe the lender. Yeah. A distribution is like when the LLC has excess money. Now we're going to pay the shareholders, and then you make the distributions in accordance with the operating agreement. I don't want to confuse too much with that, but that's effectively what it is. I don't want to confuse you with distributions too much, but effectively it's like you have to first decide how the distributions are going to be made when you have excess cash, or do you leave it in the LLC? And if you do take a distribution, then that's effectively income that you're making off of that LLC. And how it's taxed, that when forming an LLC, guys, or anything like this, your lawyer is your best friend. After you form the LLC for taxation purposes, you have to talk to your accountant. They're going to be your best friend after that. Okay. Anybody else? Also, feel free if you have a specific type of question. Otherwise, no sweat. We can pick up another time.
Thank you, Anwar. I think we're good
Gracias,
with
Anwar.
questions.
What's that?
Oh, I think there is a question. Can you wait for a second?
Sure.
Okay, the participant is going to answer or ask a question.
Okay.
Desde un principio saber cómo iniciar un negocio, pero necesito desde un principio, ¿sí? Ahora, dentro de este negocio, lo mío puedo manejarlo en 4 actividades, ¿sí? Por ejemplo, manualidades, ¿sí? Necesito material, necesito salón, necesito una ubicación. El material, yo proporcionarlo para mayor facilidad, o sea, todo el equipo, agujas, estambres, hilos, revistas, o sea, todo eso, ¿sí? Es una opción. Otra opción sería alimentos de comida, ¿sí? Pero para distribuir, ¿sí? Distribución, alimentos de comida y en su platillo y todo, ¿verdad? Otro puede ser una estética, quizás, ¿sí?
Okay. Entonces,
Entonces yo necesito ver opciones que se
Recording in progress.
She wants to kind of know, oh, sorry, there's the audio. I think that's better, maybe. No. You can go ahead and answer.
if I understood correctly, Anna, the question was, I want to start a business, but the business is kind of doing a variety of things. From the very beginning, I got a sense that she was cutting in and out, to be honest. I think you may have been muting her, but so from what I gather is she wants to start a business, but she wants to do a variety of things. Does she have to stick to one, or can she do them all? Is that more or less what the question was? Or
nada sale claro las instalaciones, ¿sí?
Okay. Sorry, we're gonna try again. Hopefully it's
okay.
no echo.
It's okay.
Vamos a intentar nuevamente.
Perdón, otra vez.
Dígame, señora.
Otra vez. O sea, yo estoy pensando en un negocio de acuerdo a mis aptitudes, ¿sí? Desconozco cómo, o sea, sé cómo funcionan, cómo trabajan, pero las instalaciones, el inicio de un negocio no lo sé. Requisitos, guía, dirección, o sea, todo lo que consiste en el inicio, ¿ok? Sí estoy enterada de los restaurantes, que son varios requisitos, ¿sí? Es fuerte la inversión y son un poquito complicado, ¿ok? Veo la otra opción de estética, una estética con varios servicios. También es costosa la inversión por el mantenimiento y ahí yo pienso mucho, dudo mucho, porque es invertir dinero en un local que no es mío, ¿sí? Ahí es donde yo necesitaría asesoramiento. Ahora, puede ser en otros los casos un traspaso, tomarla yo, que me la traspasan y yo poner el capital, ¿sí? Esa sería una opción. Pero hay otras actividades que puedo hacer, por ejemplo, alteraciones en ropa, ¿sí? Puede ser desde una prenda nueva como alteraciones, ¿sí? Y puede ser manualidades, lo que es tejido, con hilo, con estambre. Ahí yo creo que es más menos inversión y menos complicado. ¿Sí? Creo yo eso.
Okay. You want me to answer in English, Anna? You have an interpreter there, yes?
Yes, English is okay.
Okay. So I don't know the name of this person. I'm sorry, miss, but this young lady asked a question, and it's kind of an interesting question, and it's a very diverse question, but because it kind of varies. It varies. It goes all over the place, but she touches on a lot of issues that an LLC can address. Now, what she asked for those who do not speak Spanish is, I am, I have the sort of the gumption. I have the will to start a business, and I want to start a business, and I have different capacities. For instance, I know about food. Maybe she can cook. I know about aesthetics. Maybe she can do hair or eyelashes or makeup or something. And I also know about alterations. I can alter clothes. I can focus my efforts in there. Um, which one should I do? That is a very personal question, depending on your capacity to invest and also manage, and also depending on what you want to do most because you love. But there's a really important point that I want to touch on here. When you register an LLC or a corporation for that matter, it's going to say, what's the purpose of this LLC? What's the purpose? And you can say, and the most common response to that, and it's going to be in the operating agreement. It's going to say any legal purpose. Basically, you can do anything you want with that LLC. You can do all these three things with the LLC, and you can do more. And the LLC just makes money. And at the end of the year, if that money went into the LLC bank account, that LLC pays taxes for all of that income that you did under that LLC. Do I recommend that? Probably not. You can also curtail the purpose of the LLC to be something very specific. You can say something like, the purpose of this LLC is to manage personal real estate, to manage real estate. And that's it. And so anything that you do outside of that, that can be interpreted as you're going beyond the scope of the LLC. Another important thing is she says, well, investing in a restaurant is very expensive, but doing alterations, the investment is not so great. And perhaps it's more manageable. Well, sometimes maybe you want to be a passive investor. Investing in a restaurant doesn't mean you're going to put everything up front. It costs like $1.5 million to start a restaurant, just to have like the space renovated and retrofitted, maybe even more from scratch, right? But maybe you want to be like a 5% owner in a restaurant. So you put, whatever, $10,000, $15,000 into a restaurant, and you want to make it better, and you want to expect some kind of return on your investment. And that return on your investment is going to depend on how well the restaurant does. But more importantly, it's going to depend on what the operating agreement says, or the partnership agreement. And I have seen many operating agreements where people do invest in restaurants, not many, but I've seen a few, where the manager has full discretion as to when the passive investors get paid. And that's a little crazy to me, because I put $30,000 into a restaurant, and when am I going to make my money back? Well, the manager decides when, but there's no specific standard. So you want to make sure that if you are going to be a passive investor and own a part of a company, you want to have some clarity as to when you can expect for your investment to give you some kind of return. So even though this question was a bit disjointed, perhaps a little more personalized, because that requires very personalized legal attention, it still covers some really important elements of an LLC. So thank you for asking it. And I think that's that, right?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions on. Thank you so much. And I think that, yeah, it looks like folks are logging off now, but yeah, thank you for all the information. I think it was super valuable, and thank you as well to the interpreters that helped support today.
Absolutely, guys. Thank you very much. Take care. Enjoy.
Bye.